Hi, today I'm here with Rubin, who many people probably know was featured in the documentary Precarious State, which is out now and you can watch it on YouTube if you like. Hello, Jim.
Hello, glad to be here.
Great. Any other background you'd like to give about how long you've lived maybe in the Twin Cities or been involved here in the community?
Sure. Well, grew up in Hastings, just south of the cities. Went to college in St. Cloud, so I'm a Husky. And after college, I got a job working downtown Minneapolis. And pretty much been here all my life. Family's been here for a couple generations. Married somebody from Fridley who also grew up here. So definitely kind of Minnesota all along the way.
Great. Well, I am not. I moved here about 20 years ago. So tell me a little bit, and I wanted to make it clear, so this show is not like being paid for by you or any other multi-housing association or anybody like that. The production value would be much higher if it were, probably. But tell us a little bit about how you came to appear in the documentary.
Yeah, good. That's actually a good question. So I've been in housing in Minneapolis and St. Paul for a little over 30 years. And through those 30 years, I worked really hard, and we were able to accumulate a relatively large portfolio. Again, probably 10% St. Paul, 90% Minneapolis. And in doing that, I tried to do the best job I could, and part of that entailed, working with the cities. So in particular, Minneapolis, working with the city council members, working with the fire marshals, working with my neighbors, working with community organizations. And so leading up to kind of the recent turmoil in Minneapolis, I was already actively involved. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I was well positioned to continue to play a bigger role given my history, my size, and already my involvement. So that when the city started experiencing challenges here, in particular the last 5 years, I found myself in the middle of the turmoil, right on the front lines with all the issues. And I felt I was, in essence, kind of well equipped to engage the city in the issues and participate in this. And so that kind of just a sequence of events and just kind of how history played out, I find myself in the middle of what's happening in Minneapolis in playing a role in kind of a victim of all the issues, but as somebody trying to solve them. And in the recent year or so, as I was continuing to be involved in trying to figure out why we are hurting and how to fix that, it was inevitable that Rick Kupchell and I would connect because, again, I'm very active, playing a big role, trying to figure out what's going on here and fix it. And he was largely trying to figure out the same thing too, right? Which was, wow, there's a lot of issues here. How did this happen? How did we get here? So he was doing the research and trying to figure out, and I was trying to figure out, and we were both very active, spending a lot of time on this. We eventually just randomly connected. And once we did, we realized, I think we both realized that from my side, I was a good case study because I am a large apartment provider in the center of Minneapolis, experiencing the problems firsthand. And so I could be a good case study for his documentary. But for me, I was screaming at the wind, felt like that. I was trying to tell people it's really bad here. My neighborhoods are in tough shape. And I was trying to get the word out and get people to pay attention and get help. And I realized that him doing a documentary that would get widespread audience could hopefully help bring visibility to what I was dealing with. And so there were benefits for him using me, and there were benefits for me that he picked me up. And so the rest is history. You see in the documentary, I played a relatively large part.
And so you say you were a good case study, and does that mean that a case study of apartment owners or business owners that have faced struggles with violence? I mean, that seems to be a big part of the documentary.
Right. So, yeah, what I tell people, Minneapolis has, several issues, but really the biggest one, the one that is causing the most damage is crime, is safety, is public safety. And so you said kind of a couple different angles there. Yes, I'm an apartment owner, but it turns out I'm one of the largest affordable apartment owners in Minneapolis, if not the largest single owner. And so I'm providing a sizable public service, right? People who need a safe, affordable place to live that's well maintained I could provide. So that makes sense to me to come in, to kind of come into this picture. But it was a little bit more generic than that. I look at it as I have a business in Minneapolis, and I have a business that is in not just Minneapolis, but really in the heart of Minneapolis, and it's a sizable business, right? And I also just, again, I'm working every day in the city, I'm paying attention, I'm active in so many ways. I see not only how my business is suffering, but I see how my neighboring apartment building owners are suffering. I see how restaurant owners are suffering. I see how homeowners are suffering. I see how people who used to love to come to the city aren't anymore. So I can see all of this happening because again, I'm there in the environment all the time. And so when you kind of add all of this together, there's probably not a lot of people who are, I use the term in the eye of the storm. There's not as many people, there's not a lot of people that are in the eye of the storm to the extent that I am,
you are.
To the level that I am.
So one of the big criticisms that I've heard about the documentary is that some people feel like it's maybe went too far, right? And I think in particular, there was the shootout scene that happened maybe September of 2024.
Yep, about a year ago.
Right, and it ends with this kind of ominous, like, this is the new normal of Minneapolis. And I think that's not how a lot of people experience in Minneapolis, but I mean, not everyone is going through 19th and Nicollet. So how would you kind of respond to that criticism that maybe the documentary went too far in kind of creating this hellscape of Minneapolis?
Sure. So I'll attack this a couple ways. So first of all, 19th and Nicollet, okay? When I hear the term, this is the new normal, I guess there's a couple ways I kind of skin this cat. So first of all, it's 19th.
One of my favorite phrases, by the way, and I know a lot of people will probably be angry at me for that, but and maybe we're not supposed to say that anymore. But I do find that particular phrase very funny.
Okay,
but sorry, I
hopefully
don't mean to interrupt you and distract you.
No.
But.
So 19th and Nicollet. So 19th and Nicollet is in the middle of the Stevens Square neighborhood, which is a large part of my portfolio. I have several buildings, many buildings within a few square block area of that location. And I have one actually at 19th and Nicollet, so right in the middle. And since the spring of 2021, there's been an open air drug market at 19th and Nicollet. And when I mean open air drug market, I mean it's many people standing in the open, obviously, waving at people to come over and buy drugs. So this is right out in the open. It starts around 8 or 9 in the morning, goes till about midnight, 7 days a week, and now we are in year 5, finishing year 5 of this. And what happens is, so first of all, that is the new normal, right? That is the new normal. That's happening every day, all day, right? So that is true. And then what happens is when you have that type of kind of person and behavior and activity, guess what? There's trash everywhere, there's graffiti, there's broken glass, there's trespassing, there's drinking, there's gambling, there's fighting, and there's gunfire. For the past 5 years, me and my neighbors estimate that every other month there's gunshots go off. Right? So I would call that a normal thing, every other month, right?
Yeah.
So the people who are carrying weapons and gang members and are dealing drugs are there every day, all day. And bad things happen on a regular basis. So to me, that is the new normal, right? And the gunfight we showed in the documentary was, like I said, from September 2024. That is obviously a severe gunfight because there's multiple people shooting off multiple guns. It has happened more times than once that there has been multiple people shooting off guns. All right. Turns out that night in that gunfight, interestingly enough, no one was shot and killed. However, basically in front of my building, we have, I believe it's at least 4 people have been shot and killed pretty much right in front of my building, a couple of them on my front step. So again, this is happening with regularity, right? And just the behavior and the activity, by the way, is is still there.
Yeah.
It's still happening. In fact, in the recent week here, so it was Monday of this week, just Monday just prior, there was a shooting right next to my building where somebody got shot and had to go to the hospital. 2 days before that, there was an armed robbery right in front of the building. A few days before that, there was a carjacking at gunpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all within about a week and a half. So again, this behavior is happening with regularity. And one of the important points I really try to get across is that 19th and Nicollet is just one example.
Right.
There are other places in the city where the city has lost control. And we know those places. Was it Franklin in Chicago, Blaisdell and Lake Street? There's a handful of places we see in the news often where there's homelessness, drug use, drug dealing, shootings, killings, homicide, right? That this has, so that to me is saying, yes, I want the citizens, I want the people who care about Minneapolis to understand that this is happening in multiple places in the city with regularity. And so to say this is happening with normality is an accurate statement, right?
Okay.
So that's, again, that's my viewpoint because I see it. It's on my,
Right.
I see it every day.
It's normal for you living
normal
and
for me.
working in that area.
Yes.
So one question that comes to my mind when I hear that, like, you know that it's there. We're talking about it. It was in a documentary. So how do you solve for that? I mean, and where does, and I guess it go, I have multiple questions here.
Sure.
So is
Take
this
them all.
something that's gotten worse in the last 5 years? And like, who should be responsible for cleaning this up? I mean, where, yeah, let's start there.
There's so many questions there. So which one do you want to start with?
Well, has it gotten
Has it gotten
worse
worse? Okay.
in the last 5 years? And then, what do you want to see done about it?
Okay, so has it gotten worse in the last 5 years? I'm not sure on that one. I can speak from 19th and Nicollet. Unfortunately, it's been really, really bad for 5 years. That video we showed was from 2024, a year ago. I mean,
And we should,
was-
I'd like to point out, like, many long-time businesses that were there have closed.
yeah. Okay, that in fact you're raising a good point.
Fratalones,
So good point. I think from a kind of violence level, it's just been bad all along. It's not like it's getting worse. It's just been really bad all along. But you're raising a good point, which is as the months go by, as times go by one, slowly but surely, businesses are boarding up and leaving. You can't sustain a business in that, with that going on. You can't. You, as a small business owner, might fight, might want to hang on, might, just want to see it through, but eventually you can't. This has been going on for 5 years. So yes, Ace Hardware store closed, a Dollar store closed, the Steeple people left. There's a few other places that were in an office space they've left. CVS is closed. There was a Starbucks there that closed. There was a bagel place that closed. That's when I talk to city officials, I tell them you need to do something because your neighborhood is shutting down bits at a time.
And when
piece
you
by
say you
piece.
talk to city officials, who does that mean?
Everybody. I mean,
is it-
everybody.
So, like, if I had a small business there, I would probably call my city councilor. I might call the mayor. I mean, do you feel like, again, like, where's the inaction occurring, right?
Okay.
And you probably call the police too and say this is
Yeah, of
happening.
course.
And so I'm just wondering, like, where's the button that needs to be pushed to?
That is a great question that I've been working on, again, for years. So first of all, to answer part of your question there is, I have talked to every city council person that is directly related to this issue. I have talked to several city council people that aren't around there, but I think care. I have talked to basically, I think, everybody in the mayor's office. I have talked directly to the mayor multiple times. I've talked to numerous police officers. We are on our third head of the 5th precinct. Talked to all of them. I've talked directly with O'Hare. So what I mean, I've talked to everybody. It's been everybody. I even have pleas to the governor of Minnesota saying, can you please, talk with me? Can I show you what's going on? And of course, now we're trying to bring, talk to the press to just bring visibility to this. So when I mean I've talked to everybody, I have talked to everybody. And the question of why is it not getting fixed and what do we need to do to fix it? All right. The problem that I'm dealing with mixes, I would say, a couple things. It mixes a lot of low-level petty issues like selling of marijuana on the street, trespassing, drinking in public, being too loud, partying in public, gambling, right? Littering. There's a lot of things, right, that are kind of low level, right?
Yeah.
And what happens is the police doesn't have the capacity to deal with that. Okay, so I'm going to dig into this a minute. So I'm making the claim that there's the crime, a lot of the issues are kind of low level things. A lot of them, but they're low level. So what I've learned about the police in MPD is clearly they are down significant in numbers. Mm-hmm. And they have also kind of lost some of their rules of engagement and some of the tricks that they used to be able to use, they can't use anymore. And
just to define that a little bit, I think what you're talking about is, they got rid of, say, anti-loitering
you're exactly
ordinances.
Right. You are
and
exactly
things
right.
Like that. So those were tools that were, widely perceived to be targeting specific people of color and things like that. So those have been removed.
Right.
But, I'd like to hear your perspective too, but it seems like, okay, well, you've taken away those anti-loitering, those small level things
right.
to improve the quality of life. So now what's the replacement? How can police be effective without those tools that were abused?
So you are spot on. That is exactly what I meant by that comment. And so again, explaining why we are where we are. Okay, that's part of it, right? So you're down in numbers. Mm-hmm. You've lost some tools. The criminal justice system has changed, particularly under Mary Moriarty, where there's a kind of a desire or a policy to try to not incarcerate people. So you can be charged with some things, but if it's low level, they just put you right back out, and it just right. Mm-hmm. So you have a criminal justice system that isn't holding people accountable, particularly these small things, and then also, the police. There have been some high-profile cases where police can get into a very horrible situation, high pressure, and something goes horribly awry, and in some of those cases, the police have been prosecuted pretty severely, and so police are a bit afraid. They don't feel they have the cover of those above them to stand up or protect them if something goes horribly awry. So when you add all of this together, the shortage of staff and all these rules and the criminal justice system and kind of afraid to engage, they just flat out don't deal with those issues, right? They have stopped. MPD has stopped managing those issues. I use the term livability crimes. Just kind of making life in the city kind of crappy, right? Kind of miserable, because all these low-level things are allowed to happen, mm-hmm. right? Now, when a gun goes off and somebody's shot, the police are there in multiple cars and they come, right? But until that happens, they're not there.
Yeah.
So you have this every day, all day, petty, drug dealing and loitering and trash and fighting, right? Which is destroying the neighborhood. And MPD doesn't have the tools or the staff to address those issues.
Right. And to that point, I think they will say, like, we have to prioritize the big issues.
Yes.
And
that's exactly what they say.
Yeah.
So when I met with Chief O'Hare, that is basically exactly what he told me. He said, Jim, we can't help you because most of what you're dealing with, mm-hmm. we're not really in that space anymore. We're doing the more important things. So that is a lot of reasons why it's kind of allowed to happen. And then, of course, though, when you have this kind of low-level stuff, particularly when there's gangs and drugs, it's inevitable that occasionally it's going to rise to the level of something serious. But again, the police aren't standing right there to prevent it or catch it when it happens, right?
Yeah.
So something bad happens, and then the police show up 10 minutes later, and
when
the culprits are gone.
Yeah, they pick up the bullets and take people to the hospital.
Yeah, that's right. They do a report. So we've created an environment where it's virtually, I would say virtually impossible. It actually is impossible for MPD to effectively provide safe and secure neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They can't. All right. So all of these things that have been done in and around MPD have gotten that where we are now. They've gotten to this point now. All right.
So if MPD doesn't have the tools or the people to be effective, I mean, do you feel like our city government is supporting them? And are they prioritizing some of these issues?
So
in your view?
Yeah. So again, from my experience and from what I believe to be true, and from what I've learned from others in this space, I think there's a couple pieces to this. I definitely do look to leadership, right? MPD is managed and overseen by really our city council, and to a large degree also the Hennepin County attorney, right? So from what I can tell, those kind of two places in the power structure have influence over MPD and how it's going to run, and I believe have driven us to where we are. Okay.
Well, I don't think that it's the city council in charge of the police, though. Isn't that's the mayor?
Well, it's
right?
collectively. They're all part of that. It's the city council, the mayor, and Mayor Moriarty. I'll tell you in a second why I didn't mention the mayor. Okay. So I've already mentioned from a Mary Moriarty perspective, she's setting a lot of the kind of rules of engagement, kind of the policies and how law enforcement is going to be implemented in Hennepin County. And she has, her policy, what she ran on, to be honest with you, which was, hey, I'm going to be really hard on police if there's a problem, and I'm going to be really work to not hold criminals accountable. So she's setting the tone. She's creating kind of an environment that makes it difficult. All right. The reason I then go to the city council and skip over the mayor is that those kind of collectively, the mayor and the city council, the way I describe it is they're both like two parts of the power structure in the city to make decisions. The mayor roughly is, this isn't totally true, but the mayor, let's say, is half the power and the city council is half the power, right? So to get something through, you generally have to go through both of these groups, right? And if you look at statements made in public, if you look at policies that people push, if you look at funding decisions and discussions, Mayor Fry has always been supportive of MPD, has tried to increase their funding, and is really supported them in doing their job. And he's actually, I think, very close, seems to be close with Chief O'Hara. So he's trying to do the right things. Where things hang up gets in the city council, all right? And I can give you lots of examples. I'll give you a couple here quick. So for example, in the area of funding, 2 years ago in November, there was $19 million of federal money available. And one day, the chief and the mayor collectively together go down to city council and say, hey, we happen to have this one-time money available. We are struggling with crime. We would really like to use this for hiring and retention. And the city council decided no, they're going to get none of it, and they went and they put it to some other pet projects. So it's an example where the mayor and the chief are trying to do the right thing, and the city council stops them. Another example is, I believe it was a year ago, the last time they did the budget, Mayor Fry put out the budget, sends it to the city council. City council, I think, made like 75 changes. 5 or 6 times they specifically went into the police budget, pulled money from it to put towards some non-police kind of pet project. It was said 5 or 6 times. Ironically, one of those was pulling $500,000 from the recruiting budget, which you question the wisdom of that given where we are.
Right.
So again, the mayor vetoed their changes, and they overrode his veto and went forward with those cuts. So these are just two very clear, very good examples of where you have the mayor trying to move us in the right direction and the city council doing the opposite.
So
go ahead.
To jump in there, so am I interpreting right, though, that you think O'Hara should stay on? His contract's coming up in January. It sounds like you would probably support him, or?
That's actually a good question. From what I can tell and my experience with him, I think he's done an unbelievable job. Again, you think about the hand he's dealt.
Yeah.
40% reduction in staff, a Hennepin County attorney that is hard on police, soft on criminals. You have a city council that berates the police department every time they talk. Right? That's the hand he's dealt. And even with that hand, the most important statistics, homicides and carjackings and some of the big bad stuff, is improving. And the number of police officers is climbing, right? So we've turned that corner. The numbers are no longer dropping, it's now climbing. They've had some very good sized recruiting class come through. So That's some pretty darn good progress given what he's dealing with. So I think he's doing great. Now, having said that, I don't know any of the behind the scenes stuff and pay and, what people are looking for, asking for. I believe that's the city council and the mayor will decide that. But from my perspective, I'm very happy. I am ecstatic with what he's done. And again, I've met with him and he definitely cares and is trying out as hard as he can.
So I want to move on a little bit from the crime discussion. So
Okay.
that, kind of covers the pushback on the new normal. I think you covered why you feel like it is normal. The reaction to the documentary, a lot of it has been very personal, directed at you, specifically around rent violations, I guess, or what, I'm not sure exactly the terminology, but if you don't fix something or take care of your apartment. And you push back on that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm going to broaden it a little bit. So I was in the documentary, right, which is, of course, makes me very visible. But even without the documentary, I care about the city. I am paying attention to this election. I'm looking at candidates that I think will fix the problems and move us forward, and I'm supporting them. And so I'm being active and vocal and supportive, raising money, helping candidates, good candidates, whatever I can. So what happens is at least in Minneapolis, if a citizen gets involved, and in my case, I'm trying to help the moderate Democrats, the other side, the people who are opposing the moderate Democrats, i.e., the DSA, the socialist group, they're running their own candidates and they're doing what they can to win. Well, part of what happens is there's political organizations that want the socialists to win, and so they will, of course, attack moderate Democrats, but they also attack citizens who are helping those moderate Democrats, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about here is there's political organizations, in particular in this case, Minneapolis for the Many, that really supports socialist candidates and kind of attacks people on the other side. And they were, saying things about me I felt was untrue. They were putting print material out there, websites and social media. And I thought they went too far. And I tell people in politics, if you are a politician or you're running for office, you're kind of fair game to get attacked. But when you're just a citizen that wants to participate in democracy, it's a little different.
I agree.
There's a little different bar you need to follow. And I'm an apartment owner who cares about city and trying to help it. And for that, I'm getting attacked unfairly. So we thought they crossed the line, and I seek some legal advice. And we did, approach them and pushed back hard. And there was some kind of behind the scenes give and take and discussion. And ultimately they, obviously we settled with them. I can't describe the settlement, but the one thing I can talk about is that they did issue a public apology, which I think speaks volumes to how things ended.
I haven't seen them apologize for anything. So to see them apologize for that really meant something.
Yeah, and it was nice because, well, first of all, just landlords in general, we're just a normal kicking bag, right? So it was nice for them to not only retract and then apologize for what they said, but then to go one step further and just acknowledge affordable housing is a very important service. And we are happy for those people like Jim who does it as hard and works hard to do it well. So I thought it was a nice, not just apology, but turning the table and saying, hey, let's acknowledge the public service he's providing. I thought it was great for me and our industry. And again, for the city, right?
So let's talk about the industry a little bit, because it has been a huge dividing and divisive issue in this election, as it has been in the last few elections. It seems like they really want to make this argument that it's renters against people who own rental property, and one of the ways they try and go at attacking anyone who owns property is by saying that they have all these violations, where they're not fixing things or not. Why do you think that they're going after that issue in particular? Because, and then the second part of this question is, I'm sure there are some property owners that are not taking care of their properties and all the rest. But then the problem is they lump everyone together. Like, so everyone who owns a piece of rental property is just trying to get by with letting roaches run free and pipes freeze and all the rest. So how do we explain that maybe not everyone is doing that?
Yeah, okay, there's a lot to this question. First of all, it's actually kind of funny. Throughout the years, I've read a lot of old history and old literature, and I recognized many years ago that being a landlord is just not a popular thing to do.
No,
right?
yeah, it never will.
I picked an occupation that is just demeaned all the time and kicked on all the time.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to do was I just wanted to do a good job at it, right? I wanted to be able to not only have a successful business, which could sustain itself and take care of its employees and its communities and its tenants, but have one that basically did a good job, right? And was appreciated by the city and the communities, right? So that's what I've always tried to do. What the current attacks are, like I said, they're the similar attacks. They're always the same attacks. All landlords are bad. All landlords are greedy. All landlords, do a terrible job of maintenance and just try to squeeze every penny out of every tenant. That's always been the argument. The interesting thing is, well, it's just broad brushed, and frankly, it tends to work, right? I mean, it's hard to prove or disprove. It's just these general comments. And so I think you'll see that because, again, it's easy to do. But what I'd like to do at some point in time is, the people who attack this, I would welcome an interview. I would welcome a dialogue to say, okay, so you say all landlords are bad or these landlords are bad. Well, okay, but don't you still need affordable housing? Don't you still need, okay, so.
Right, that's
So you want us to all close shop and have no affordable housing? So there's a couple of things. So sometimes, particularly in the DSA, one of the things they talk about is having government owned and run housing. That's kind of their solution, which I tell people, we can have that dialogue. That is a conversation we can have. We've seen it throughout history, and it tends to go very badly, but we could have that conversation.
Right.
As it relates to, private ownership, there are differences, right? There are some that are really good. There's some not as good. There's some that are terrible. I will tell you that in my experience in the industry, interestingly enough, landlords really don't like bad landlords. And it's obvious why. Because a bad landlord makes it more difficult for all of us. The city, I can give you many examples where they will pass policies to correct one bad landlord's behavior, but their policy affect all of us.
Everyone. Yeah. And this total side point, but it makes me think of, I was so resentful of the shoe bomber, right? Because I don't know, this so many years ago, this one guy did this boneheaded thing, and then for years and years and years, everyone has to take off their shoes.
Yeah.
So
it's that similar kind of, situation where, yes, to fix the one, we have to impact the entire industry.
Yeah.
So with you behind the scenes within the apartment ownership group, we work together to help each other, and we work together to kind of prevent bad landlords from either being bad or we get them out of the right. So we actually are fighting against that already. All right, and so I'll be honest with you. The part of the bummer is it's really, really hard to provide good affordable housing in an interurban area.
And what makes it so hard? Is it, I think,
regulations, in our case, crime, you're typically, in our case, we have older buildings, right? You're dealing with tons and tons of regulation. You have inspections all the time. You have, of course, people you're renting to have hiccups and then don't pay rent, and you have banks who lend you money and they have a whole bunch of rules, and if you don't follow, they take it back. It is so hard to succeed in affordable housing in an intercity environment, and so really the bummer, part of the bummer is the opposite thing is true. Is instead of vilifying these people who are doing this, particularly ones that are succeeding, really the opposite should be true, right? The city should be reaching out to them and saying, hey, you've got a lot of affordable units. How can we help? How can we make your job easier? Or, hey, I want to craft a policy that's going to affect your industry. Can you please come in and review it with me so we can make sure we craft it the best way possible? So this is a kind versus, again, particularly on the DSA side, they go behind closed doors. They've never run an apartment building ever. And they'll go behind closed doors and they'll craft housing policy and they'll come and say, we're going to do this and pass this.
And I think to me that's one of the things that this election is highlighting is there isn't a real balance. Like they're gonna listen to, say, certain nonprofits or other organizations that are going to tell them this is how an apartment policy should look, right? Without coming to you,
right,
or to other owners. And that's the part that's missing, is that willingness to listen to like both sides. Because if they want more affordable housing, they have to have builders. They have to have some owners, because the money just isn't there for the city or the state to become
to come in
like,
and just take over.
Yeah,
that's not an option. You have to deal with the Jim Rubins of the. Why not talk to them and have a dialogue and work with them versus just ignoring him and vilifying him and going your own way.
And you know, it makes sense too, because why do you want someone like Jim Rubin attacking you in the next time you go to get elected, right? Like, you don't want citizens to, you want to show that you've made an attempt to reach out and listen to both sides, in my opinion. I'm going to ask you a few questions about specific policies that have come up and kind of get your take on them if you're familiar with them. So one I hear a lot lately is this TOPA, tenant
opportunity to purchase.
Yes.
Okay.
What exactly is it, and are you for or against that?
Okay, so TOPA, again, every one of these policies can have a lot of nuances and be written many ways. But generally speaking, TOPA is Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It's basically a law, or it's an attempt to facilitate tenants purchasing apartment buildings. Okay, that's what it's trying to facilitate.
As like a co-op.
It's like a co-op or joint venture, who knows, right? Somehow, pooling together to buy a property. And so generally the way this policy works is if an owner wants to sell a property, they would have to let the city know, and they would have to give a certain amount of time to tenants or nonprofits, whoever, right, to negotiate and buy that building first. And then if not, then we can move on and go to the open market. And depends how the rules are written, they might have right of first refusal in the future. So that's generally what it is about, okay? To my knowledge, I think it exists, I could be wrong on this, but I think it exists in one other place in the United States, which is, I believe, Washington, D.C. I think it is.
It is funny that Minneapolis loves to be the place that says, we're the only place that does this, right?
Yeah.
You know,
the first to try, or to be cutting edge. And so it's not very common. And what happens is that the reality is, today, when I go to sell a property, I market it to the world. Of course, we tell everybody, right? There's actually nothing preventing from a group of tenants or a nonprofit from buying. In fact, I have sold several buildings to nonprofits, right? So in the current environment, they already have that opportunity, right? So the other, of course, obvious question to ask is that buying apartment buildings, frankly, is very, very hard. Right? You need to have a lot of cash. You need to have good credit. You need to have deep pockets. You need to have relationships with banks, right? You got to have. Typically, you have to have experience. Like, a lot of lenders won't even lend to you to buy a building if you don't have any experience, right? So there's a lot of hurdles. So I think,
and maintenance once you buy it, right?
Yes, then it's right, which is why, again, a lender's not just going to lend on somebody if they're not confident they can't run it. Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of realities to buying properties that are hard and then running properties that are hard. And so it's unclear really how many tenants would actually take advantage of this, right? Anyway, and what happens is the cost of doing this, well, first of all, you now have administrative costs. The city has to monitor every sale, and they have to make sure you give proper notice, and you have to get right. So you now have a bureaucracy that you've created, okay? And then what happens is it kind of really messes with the real estate industry, Because today, if I want to buy, I can just go ahead and sell. If I now have a process that takes months to go through, now selling becomes harder and more expensive. You also have laws, like particularly with exchanging real estate, there's like 1031 exchange laws, which gets into, everything's got to follow very tight time frames. A lot of that gets kind of messed up when you have these processes introduced in the middle of that. All of a sudden, a lot of the exchange rules, a lot of the rules that people use to buy and sell real estate go out the window. So what does that do? It makes less people want to buy property here. Right? So now you just lowered the value of your properties because there's less demand to come in here. Right? So you've added bureaucracy, you've added cost, you've added confusion, you've put some negative marks on this metro area now for being an apartment owner, right? Which it doesn't need. All for what? Because you might have one tenant group, which again, if they had the ability, they could even do, there's nothing preventing from. So this is a whole bunch of noise and cost and confusion for virtually nothing, right? And this is a good example why we wish people pushing this would talk to owners and will say, well, this is where you're going to run. This is what it's going to do to the market. This is what it's going to, how it's going to change things.
So along those lines, have any of the candidates approached you about rent stabilization and said, we want to craft a rent stabilization ordinance that is effective, if that's possible? Has anyone ever talked to you? I mean, because I'm going to go ahead and guess that you're not in favor of it, right? So I'm just wondering if anyone's talked to you about why it is a good idea or a bad idea.
So first of all, just to close out TOPA and answer that question, no one has approached me and no one has approached our industry in Minneapolis to say, should we do this and how should we do it? So no industry input for TOPA. Now, rent stabilization, otherwise known as rent control, is been talked about a lot. It actually exists in St. Paul. The voters passed, basically gave permission to the city council to implement it here in Minneapolis, right? So they kind of went over hurdle number one on the way towards rent control, rent stabilization. To specifically answer your question, no, our industry hasn't been engaged, but in fairness, it hasn't at least recently been in the dialogue. You know, the city council hasn't really picked it up. There was a vote, I don't know, some time ago, a year or so ago, where it kind of got shelved and it just hasn't come back up. So we haven't been discussed with it, but then again, in fairness, they haven't been talking about it. Rent control, I think that the nice thing about rent control is that we have a really, really good case study across the river.
Right.
And we can see exactly how that's going. We can look at development numbers. We can look at rent increases. We can look at, investments in properties. We can look at what properties are selling for. We can look at impacts to valuation. You have all of that data. Is about as good of case studies you can get right next door.
Right.
And I mean, you don't need me to tell you, but it's not going well.
Right. A few more final questions. Is that right?
I have as many as you want. I can just keep going.
So one of the proposals I've seen recently is, I guess they divide property owners into like three tiers.
Yeah.
And if you are in the third tier, you're going to have to go before the city council to get your license, your rental license renewed, and the people in the third tier are ones that have a lot of violations. What do you think of this policy? Is this a good way to hold negligent property owners accountable?
So, okay, good question, and you're describing it well. In Minneapolis, rental properties get a grade, basically. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And Tier 1 is the best, Tier 2 is middle, and Tier 3 is the bad one. And it's directly related to kind of how many problems you have with that property. It's the number of units. Right? There's an equation that describes it. And recently, there was a policy passed that something along the lines of Tier 3 properties kind of have another hurdle now to go over to kind of get good graces with the city, right? And that they're described, I believe, as going through the city council, right? They have now saying this. So, I mean, for me personally, our properties are pretty much all Tier 1. Every once in a while, we may have some issue and the property drops to Tier 2 shortly and it goes right back up. So for us, I asked my team what we thought about it, and they're like, it's not going to affect us. We've never had a Tier 3 property ever. But again, it was crafted without any input from owners, okay? So I'm not saying we should do it. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, right? But again, they didn't ask the owners at all. So, I would ask questions like, wait a second, you already have this whole department called inspectors that are managing this whole thing. You have all this, you have fines, you already have, why are you adding a whole nother mechanism by what you're going to make this decision? Is that really wise, right? Why not just improve, if there's a problem with the mechanism you have, why not improve that? So that'd be one of my questions. Why would you add a whole nother thing, a whole nother process? Number one. Number two is, again, I don't fully understand all the details, but going through the city council, there's not a ton of tier 3 properties, but let's say it's a few hundred. How much time is that going to take to actually, for all 13 city council members to really look at what's going on at this property and decide what to do? Right? That seems like it's a bit much. There's a lot of other things I personally would have the city council focused on, right, and fixing than this, right? And again, I largely think they're creating a problem out of nothing. Right? My opinion is it was largely done for political points right before an election, right? So really, again, looking at how is this going to affect the city council, is this realistic? And then the other thing that I remind people of is running particularly inner city affordable housing is very hard, okay? And this is going to make it harder. If you have somebody that has provided a decent set of apartments, decent housing to some low-income tenants, and those tenants cause a lot of damage, that now causes this to go into tier 3. Are we going to threaten that owner to pull that away? Why would we do that? Again, we should be taking the opposite approach, which is, hey, you're a tier 3 owner. Here's the issues. How do we work together? How can we make you more successful? They always go after landlords with a baseball bat, and they're always beating us on the head. Why not say, how can we help? How can we facilitate making you better? Now, there will be bad landlords that do a really crappy job, and they don't listen, and they don't behave, and they keep getting worse, and they keep, being mean to the city and terrible to their tenants. Yes, but again, does that really have to go to the city council? That should be something they've already got that system set up. They already have this process set up. So this is, to me, is really a kind of an almost nothing, especially for us, it's zero impact. But for the city, I think you're going to see it's going to be a big headache. But again, it's one more reason for people to not have apartments in the city, right? And I feel bad for those, particularly smaller owners that maybe only have a couple buildings, right? They can't have the staff that I have, and they're really struggling to make a go of it, just getting beat up for this. And what are you going to do? Take away licenses and close down properties? I mean, that's the exact opposite of what you want. So I think I personally think it's terrible. My prediction is it won't last very long, and they'll realize it's untenable, and they'll ignore it or get rid of it. But for me, it won't have any impact. But a good example of, again, why wouldn't they just engage our industry and have us help? What is their objective? What are they trying to? What is the problem they're identifying? Let's validate that.
Are they really trying to fix the issue, or are they just trying to get elected?
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
So one thing they did, and that I thought made sense, but not everyone I've talked to agrees with me, is the banning. And I don't know if you use these programs, the algorithms that would tell you how long, how much that you should be getting or could get for that rental property, and then they take that information, they share it around. And so the argument was that these programs, I think it's called like RealPage, maybe, were hurting tenants, and so they passed an ordinance that you can't use this software. That seemed reasonable to me, but what's your take on it?
First of all, we don't do that.
Okay.
Again, I'm an active owner that's president, and I have a really good team, and we talk, and we have an internal team that just can do the pricing. So we don't use that, and that is largely what most apartment owners do. So in housing, it is big time against the law to do price fixing. Okay, so what price fixing would be is if we have a neighborhood, let's say, where there's only 4 owners who own almost everything. And we go have a secret meeting and say, hey, we're going to all collaborate and coordinate our rents behind closed doors to artificially set them high. Because if we all come out artificially high, they have to pay it, right? So it is big time no-no for apartment owners to discuss kind of their private pricing that is not public together. Mm-hmm. You just don't do it. No one goes there. We all know that. Anybody who does our industry, no one goes there. So that's already a law. Now, what was happening, and my understanding of this particular situation was there was a company that would take apartment owners' private pricing data in and basically do that, kind of electronically, do that backroom meeting, right? And the fact that there was sharing of private data and using that to manipulate pricing, that was the crux of the issue. There are pricing mechanisms. You could go out on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. You could see all these pricing, and you could write a little program to look at pricing and kick you out with the average price. I mean, anybody can do that. But that's public data that's being published, and that's okay. The problem is when you crossed over into using private pricing information that no one else knew, and you're using that and that's where particularly the company that was driving this got into trouble, was they were using some private data to do this.
Right.
And because that is clearly against the law, right? So again, for us here in Minnesota, all the big owners, there's an organization I should mention called Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. Mm-hmm. It's kind of it's a group. It's kind of it's an association basically of apartment owners, and they actually have staff, and we pay dues. And a lot of what they do is education, keeping up on laws, right? And making sure that we all are following state, city, and federal laws. And so they help many owners in the state use that forum to keep out of trouble just like this.
Point of clarification there. Is it just state owners? Because I know, what is it they called? Widmeyer is one of the...
Widener
is one of the biggest apartment owners in the city, and they're based out of Washington. And I think a lot of people also take issue with companies like that, or so do they... And when you're talking about regulations, it also occurs to me there's an odd thing that happens where something that's that big, they have the money to make sure that they follow the regulations, right? And lobby for certain regulations, whereas your smaller people, and as you were kind of mentioning earlier, everyone gets thrown in the same bucket. And is that fair that the Widmers or Widener, thank you, are treated the same as somebody who maybe owns 3 or 4 apartment buildings?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, Minnesota Multi-Housing Association is Minnesota only, i.e. the name. Okay. If you're a national company but have some buildings here, you typically would join because they help you understand Minnesota's environment. Okay. Right? To help you be successful here. So Widener would participate in Minnesota Housing Association even though they have apartments everywhere. But what you're describing is an interesting challenge, which is, I had at my peak well over 1,500 apartments, right? So I'm a local owner that's large. Then you have the Wideners and the Dominions, right, which own all over, and they may own thousands of units in our state. And then you have many mom and pop shops that might have just a duplex or a couple fourplexes. And we all have to follow the same rules.
Yeah.
We do, which again highlights when you kind of prosecute, when you pass laws, you kind of need to keep this in mind. You're not worried about the Wideners. They can have full-time lawyers to watch for this stuff and make sure they do the right things. But that mom and pop shop, this is their hobby and they're doing it, you might snag them up, but you don't want to lose them. You don't want to punish them, right? So again, this all gets back to how you create policies and roll it out. You need to keep this kind of thing in mind. And that's a lot of times when MHA, when people I will talk to the city, I'm like, you need to keep in mind all these owners, right? There's a lot of people that rent a house and that's it. Right. And you're going to give them, you're going to now they have to worry about TOPA. Now they have to worry about all the rules of rent control. Now they have to worry about, this tier 3 regulation, right? So you realize that's who you're going to be the hardest on because they have the least ability to adapt. I'm not saying we shouldn't do these things, but I'm like, you have to keep this stuff in mind, and that's why you need good owners, people, groups like MHA to help.
So. Thank you for explaining that. And one thing that you haven't touched on are property taxes, which is obviously a big issue, right? But so given property taxes and all that, and this will be my final question. What is the right formula for getting more affordable housing in the city, in your estimation? And are there any candidates that really understand the issue and have good policies?
Yeah, I think so. So there's really two big topics there: property taxes and more affordable housing. I do want to touch on property taxes. Okay, property taxes for an apartment owner are a very big line item. I mean, this is very big, right? Apartment owners historically have paid a lot of money into property taxes, okay? Now, here where we live in Minneapolis and Hennepin County, property taxes are generally assessed on a county level, right? And so we have apartment buildings, of course, downtown, skyscrapers, homeowners, we all pay property taxes. Because of the issues in the city of Minneapolis that we're facing, the apartment owners have experienced a 20 to 40% reduction in our values, okay? Well, that means our property taxes have gone down 20 to 40% because our values are down, because we have higher vacancies and our rents are low and we have lots of problems, right? So our property taxes are actually reduced because of these issues. The problem is that the counties and the city still need the money, so they got to pick it up somewhere. It's now falling on the backs of homeowners. And so that's actually one of the big issues we hear in the city and in Hennepin County today is homeowners' property taxes are going up, which again goes back to we need to have a well-run city to get the values to turn around. Affordable housing. Okay, so affordable housing is tricky because building apartments is really expensive. I mean, almost by definition, you can't build an affordable apartment. If you look at to make the numbers work, they just don't work.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen certain projects where each unit is like $400,000 to build.
So it's like $300,000 on average, something like that in Minneapolis. We're talking just your basic small cookie cracker one bedroom. It's like $300,000 to build. Well, you can't charge affordable rents and support that.
Right.
You can't. Okay, by definition. So this is by our challenge. There actually are, though, a lot of things that could be done. There are a lot of things to do. By far, from what I understand, from what I believe, the number one thing you can do, by far, hands down, easiest, simplest, is build as many apartments as you can.
Yeah.
Okay? And people are like, wait a second, you're only building $300,000 units. No one can afford those. Yeah, but you know what happens is the more inventory you have, that increases supply, which will bring price down. So I have older stuff. When things are working well in a city and a new building opens up, your top tier tenants go there. Well, they leave somewhere, right? That's going to be your buildings that are maybe 10 years old and they're funeral, right? So then the people below them move into those, right? And it basically, people are always kind of shuffling up. And so me, who have the older inner city stuff, we kind of indirectly have to compete with that. We just have more units competing for the current tenant base. The best way to help keep price down, by far, is build as much as you can. So that gets into zoning rules and kind of pro-development, right? And just creating a city where people really want to live. And I had a city council, somebody running for city council the other day call me and say, how do we get more units into my neighborhood? I said, make it a place where people want to live. We were talking, of course, about safety and security. Like, if you solve that, people will come back and live here, and developers will figure out, they will come. If they see a lot of people want to be here, they will come. And the more units you build within a city, within a geographic area, it helps bring down prices kind of across the board in your set of apartments. So that's the number one thing. Build.
And my understanding is that building permits are way down in the city. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, again, talking St. Paul. St. Paul, I think they're virtually non-existent. In Minneapolis, I do understand the way down, but you have to understand, again, okay, so developers, it is very hard to develop. This is a hard, arduous process. It takes years. You have to raise money. There's lots of risk. You need a bank involved, right? And a lot of builders, of course, build metro-wide or statewide or nationwide, right? Today, when they look at building in Minneapolis, they say no. Why do they say no? I can tell you why they say no. They could say it's not safe, and the current city council, we don't have confidence in them. Right? They're not going to steer the city right. Okay, so they look at developers. Look at this is true everywhere. Developers look at who's running the city, who's running the county, who's running the state. Look at your tax laws, your zoning laws. Right? They look at all of this, and right now when they look at Minneapolis, there's a high vacancy, rents are down, and the costs are really high. So Minneapolis right now has created an environment where it doesn't make sense for developers to develop. So not, a few will try, they'll find a little niche or a little spot in a neighborhood they like, and we'll do it. But by and large, developers are saying, you know what, my chance of success is so much higher in Rogers or, Bloomington or White Bear Lake because it's safe, the city's run well, taxes may be better, maybe the zoning better, so that's where I'm gonna build. So you'll see development will go where it makes sense, right? This is what leaders need to understand. To me, it's obvious, right? Developers will go where it makes sense. And that's why if we get good leadership and they want to focus on this, they can make a huge difference with tax policies, zoning, right? Safe and secure, right? Make it be a place where people want to live, and then go out and reach out to developers and ask them, what would I need to do here to make you want to come and build?
Right.
And a good leadership will do that, and I mean, it works. And again, ironically, that is the number one best way to keep affordable housing in Minneapolis is just build as much of whatever you can.
Right.
That's the best way to do it.
Well, this has been very insightful. Thank you. Before we finish out, is there any topics that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to cover?
I mean, I could talk for hours. The one thing I do want to mention, because I never miss an opportunity for this, is that there is an election for all of Minneapolis leadership on November 4th. And so I encourage people to, if they care about the city, to do some research and make sure they know who to vote for and go out and vote. That is probably the biggest thing I want to get out is there's an election. It's very important. We want to get as many people to come out and vote as possible.
All right, great. Well, thank you for being on.
Yeah, you bet.